Hi, this is Goichi. Welcome to the Doorway to the World. Today is the episode 4 of Life of David, the last episode. Dun, 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 dun. Well, Life of David. Well, David's getting old now, and his kingdom, I think it comes to the new chapter. I think its generations it's gonna be changing, and this is the time he started thinking about his heir, next generations. So this is what happened. You can read the story, the latter life of King David in 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2. Well, David began preparing for the building of the temple. He wanted to build a temple, but because what happened to David and a lot of things, you can read that in the Bible, that God said, you're not going to build a temple, but your son's going to build it. But you can prepare materials and etc., etc. Make a plan for him. That's what he did. And he charged Solomon and the other princes, with the task of building the temple. And as I say, David became quite old that time, approaching 70 years old. And his health began to fail. And he couldn't keep himself warm when he's sleeping. So a young woman was appointed to keep him warm in the bed and slept with him, But nothing sexual going on, just keep him warm, like it's... Well, nowadays, some people just sleep with a cat and stuff, keep it warm. It's the same thing, this young woman. But, he became quite frail and getting quite old there. And around that time, he was thinking about who's gonna take over, who's gonna take over. And I think other people are thinking about that too, especially his sons. And his fourth son, Adonijah. So he thought, well, I think I'm gonna be the one. So he attempted a coup, taking the throne by force. And the interesting thing is, he was trying this attempted coup with Joab, the general of the army. This is interesting and sad and tragic, actually. Remember, over the episode 3, the reign as a king, we talked about this difference of opinions and political differences between David and Joab getting bigger and bigger over the time. And then got to this point that Joab going against David. He has been very loyal to David from the beginning. Joab was a nephew of David, but about same age, because Joab's mother was one of the oldest sister of David. And then there's a big age difference there. So when the Joab was born, probably around the similar time that David was born. So they kind of grew up together in a way. And Joab joined David at the cave of Adram, and they went through the same conflict and same battle, then fight for each other, fight for each other, fight those battles with together, and Joab has been eliminating all those threats to David, in my eyes anyway, according to how I read it, But I think there's a big chasm between them in what they believed, or how they believed and how they conduct, and then eventually brought this point that the Joab had to go against David in old age. You see, David was old and Joab was old as well. And then probably Joab saw that Adonijah, the fourth son, by the way, the first two sons died, and didn't mention the third son, but Joab thought he might be the heir, fit for the heir. But with those things happening, on the other side of it, in the other group, there was Nathan and Bathsheba. The Bathsheba's son Solomon, and they convinced David to declare Solomon as the next heir to the throne, and David agreed with it. So David called National Assembly and publicly declared and anointed Solomon as the next king. So this attempted coup didn't flourish, you see. And then it solved kind of peacefully in a way, and Solomon was declared as the next king. Well, that was that. But David instructed Solomon in private. He passed the plan of the temple to him, said, this is the plan, build accordingly. And also he instructed Solomon to make sure you walk with God like I did walk with God, because God is with you always, and if you walk with God, he will support you, exalt you. And David also instructed Solomon one more thing, said, deal with Joab the traitor and Shimei the son of Gera after I died. You see, because at that point this chasm between David and Joab is so big. David saw Joab as a traitor, you see, and he saw Joab as the Solomon's threat to the Solomon, to the throne. So he instructed him to get rid of him. Very sad. And then that's what happened after David died. The Solomon killed Joab. Very sad though. I quite liked him, But anyway, all that instruction was left to Solomon and passed on everything to the next generation. And David died with a natural cause, it says. Age about 1775. Interesting, isn't it? He walked with God and he died naturally. He lived his life to the full and he died. And he was buried in Jerusalem, having served God purpose in his own generation. That's what it says. You see, so David, that's the life of David. Very eventful. From the birth, from the beginning, to the youth, and to the adulthood, and to the old age, many things happened. Very turmoiling. It's far from a peace and serenity, wasn't it? Till his death. But that's what becomes, that's what it means to become a king, I suppose. But, very interesting, exciting life. So, from this David story, the life story, what can we learn from it? What makes him so special? People's favorite character, great man, exciting life, So we're going to have a little summarize his life, and what makes him so different and so special. This is a summary of it. David began his life as a humble shepherd's boy, with a possible stigma regarding illegitimacy of his birth. Society, with its law and tradition and culture surrounding David, might have not been a friendly one, as we hoped for. It's very unfriendly to him. And in that kind of circumstance, one thing kept David going and kept him upright. And do you know what it was? It was God. And David's love for God and faith in God's faithfulness, that's kept him upright, walking in righteousness. We can read that in many Psalms he wrote, how he loved God and how he trusted his faithfulness. See, it didn't matter about the circumstances he was in. one thing did not change. That's faith in God. See, David never pursued to be a king of the nation of Israel. Bible does not mention that. You see, you don't hear David say, I want to be a king. I'm going to be a king. I want to be a king. Make me a king. It doesn't say that at all. At least, the scripture, we can't read that. He was tossed about by many events and circumstances which he had no control over. In those turmoil, he just followed how his heart led him. And that heart, the Bible said, he had heart after God's heart. God's providence and provision, faithfulness and grace are always with David. You see, many of us, when we face all the circumstances and how we were born and how the society treats you or all things happen, we just say, this is it. I don't care. And go like that. But no, David kept going because he had heart after God's heart. He knew his faithfulness. See, David never made an effort to get a mighty man either. You see, I said earlier that he never said that he never promoted himself to be a king. And also, those men came and gathered around him. He never actually advertised or asked the people to gather. People just came, didn't they? And, when he became a king, it's the same, that he never promoted himself as a king. People came, asked him to become a king. David just simply accepted the God's plan and purpose in his life. And that's why he became a leader of those people and became a king of Israel. He didn't refuse that either, in not to force humility. He accepted what God planned for. And that's something that we need to grasp hold of. Quite often we have a false humility and said, oh no, it can't be, we cannot do this, we cannot do this, etc. If you're chosen to be someone, be that someone, because that's God's providence, provisions, the God's purpose. It's God's plan. Who are you to say no? Well, in a worldly standpoint view, now he became a king. In a worldly standard and point of view, that David might not be the perfect king, though. Like some might say that, oh, he's not even greater king either. A lot of things that the way that ruled and governed, there are many greater kings there, politically, like fighting and winning a battle is one thing, but ruling the country is a different matter, and David, I think, experienced that. He had many difficulties, many mistakes, and even sinning, that his complacency in peacetime led him fall into the fleshly temptations with Bathsheba and subsequent murder and the death of his child. Power and wealth that blinded him, that led him to quantify his security by counting his army instead of trusting the God's providence and divine protections. Like he has been done all his life, but at that moment he forgot. Like lack of sense of duty as a leader of the organization, the kingdom nation, he often acted according to his emotions and feelings that he forgot to consider the thought and feeling of the soldiers and people serving him, and that led into the tragedy of losing his loyal friend like Joab, because of this conflict between the difference that brought a conflict between those two in the political opinions. and also, like his family, dealing with his family. Again, his emotions and his duty as a king. There's a kind of wasn't working really well. Didn't deal that well, and it was ended in tragedy of the sons got murdered, or sons got killed, and that kind of things, And so, in all, David, as a king, as a ruler, he wasn't a perfect, ideal ruler. This all sounds harsh, isn't it? But at the same time, we can have a great comfort in this, that knowing David qualities, or even lack of qualities as a king, are all too common, all very, very much common to us, and very much familiar to us. And we can kind of relate it to him. If he's one of the perfect human, that everything he does is perfect, probably we cannot relate to this story, the life story of David. But he wasn't like that. He was very much human like us, made mistakes, and got into the troubles, etc., etc. We can relate it to him. I think that's very important. But he was still a special man. So what separates him from others? What makes him so special? It is, as I mentioned before, his heart. That was different. His heart, that was after God's heart. Through his turmoil in life, the one thing never changed. That was his heart, desire, and love for God. All through his life, the only one thing David pursued, really. He never pursued to be a king, never pursued to be a leader, never pursued to be the wealthy guy or millionaire, never pursued to be a charismatic, famous people. He never pursued those worldly glory, rather. But he pursued only one thing. That was being in God's presence and worshiping him, having a fellowship and communion with him. That was his heart desire. You see, Psalm 27 verse 4, it says, he wrote in this psalm, he sang this psalm, he said, one thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, and gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and seek him in his temple. This psalm sums up who David was and David is. And that was why he brought the Ark of Covenant, you see, into Jerusalem, not in Gibeon. And God approved it because God knew his heart is to be with them. And that was God's heart. God wants to be with us. So, one may, some people may not choose David as a king, but God chose him. That's important. People might choose you as who you are, but God chose you to be who you are. David's same. God chose him as a king. And it makes David God's chosen king, the anointed king, the chosen one. God did not choose, I believe, God did not choose David because of his ability as a great ruler or great leader or great king. But God chose him because of God's heart and love for him. God knew David's heart, and then David could keep his faith in God and would carry out and obey his command in any circumstances he might face. Why? Because he knew David's heart was for him. God can deal with any shortfalls, lack of quality or whatever in any of the men in order to fulfill his purpose, you see. as long as the one keeps his or her faith in him. God is big enough, bigger than we think. And we, sometimes people think, we might think, oh, because I am like this, I've done this, I'm not good with this, maybe God cannot do it. I tell you what, God is big enough to deal with all that. You see. Jesus teaches us to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength. And that's what David did. And God was with him until the end. Maybe David, even after becoming king, knew the true king was God himself. Do you remember in the introduction I said, it was never God's intention, God's will, God's plan for the Israel to have a king. He clearly said in 1 Samuel 8, that God said, I am the king. I am their king. And then God appointed leaders called judges to administrate, to bring his will to be done on this earth. Maybe David knew that in his heart, that true king, he was a king over Israel, but he knew in his heart that the true king is a God. I'm only the one that appointed by God to bring his will onto this earth, like time of Judges. Maybe that's why David said, I knew the Lord made me king and Lord exalted Israel. There's some of the scripture, in a psalm, David said, Lord said to my Lord, etc., etc. Was clearly talking about there was a Lord above him. And I think that's the key to it. When God appoints us into some position of authority, we must remember the true king, the ultimate authority, the one who rules is not us, the one who sits on the throne up in heaven, the creator of the whole universe. See, he's a true king. And we are here to administrate his command, his will, his purpose on this earth. As the leaders, as the judges, as the ecclesias, as Christians. David, that's why God said, he's after my own heart, because he knows. That's why I believe God appointed him to be a position of governing, because he understands how to govern in my kingdom, my as a God, in God's kingdom. This is a guy who's after my own heart, God says. I think that's what makes David special, approved by God as a faithful one, man after my own heart. And he's the king over Israel and ancestral line of true king, Jesus Christ. I give you the question, I put a question to you. Who is your true king in your life? And who are you in God's purpose? Like David, that the circumstances you have been living or you have been put, you have no control over. Those things happen. The world, even world say that things happen. Yeah. But despite all that, if you know who you are and who your true king is, you can go over, get over all those mountains and fulfill God's purpose. That will give you such a blessing, such a pleasure, such a peace. I believe David died on his deathbed, probably looked back his life and said, it was exciting life. a lot of heartaches and troubles, but I walked with God and experienced Him all the way through. And now I'm walking into His glory, up in heaven. Well, when I die, go to the heaven, I'd like to talk to Him. Many people would like to talk to David, I think. So, there's a massive queue there, but I don't mind. We got eternity to queue up. So it's all right. And I will tell you, walking with God like David did, any circumstance we can get over and say at the end, said, wow, it was an exciting life. Just like a film. Special guy David, something that we can learn. So as I said earlier, at the beginning, many studies, many teachings, many books, many preachings going on. Get into it. Because I'm only pointing out the doorway for you to walk in. So this is a doorway to walk in, to study the life of David so that you might see the heart of God. Bless you. Next time.